Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the questions coming out now are all about will and can Donald Trump pardon himself to avoid having a bit of a tap on the shoulder as a result of Robert Mueller's investigation. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, I mean, as I'm doing this, I'm reading the news that Donald Trump has fired his defense secretary. He's appointed a new defense secretary, which is a bit of an odd ploy when you've just been fired as president yourself. But of course, this is all part of his business as normal. I'm still the president. And do you know what? I'm still going to be the president, even though you keep reading reports that he will ultimately concede for whatever reason. But if he doesn't, of course, then that throws into the mix what's going to happen with these so-called pardons. Because if he really doesn't believe he'll have to step aside as president, will he even bother? The issue came up a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe even. And he was asked, you know, could he pardon himself? So he said, yes, of course I could, but what would be the point? And indeed, while he was president, it seemed there was no point. But if he's not going to be president, then there is. So will he pardon himself? Can he pardon himself? The first thing I'm really going to throw in here is why I really wouldn't get too het up about it. We have a similar thing in the UK with Boris Johnson, people looking forward to the day when he's behind bars. I mean, not only do I think that's not going to happen, I wouldn't even fixate on that. My concern is always stop them doing what they're doing. That's good enough for me. I know it's disappointing from a sense of justice, because if people aren't punished for doing terrible things, then what's to stop the next person? Because the next person knows they can do all these terrible things. And do you know what? The worst that can happen to them, the absolute worst, is someone stops them. I mean, that's all that's going to happen in most cases to Donald Trump. Someone has put an end to him. His rhetoric will still go on. He'll still carry on. Now, so I just don't think it's healthy looking forward to that future. Look forward to the future where Donald Trump isn't in place, really. But can he? It's a really strange question. My immediate thoughts looking into it, I'm not just talking out the top of my head here, but bear in mind I'm also not an expert, is yes, he can absolutely. Now, I only started reading into this seriously when it was evident that Biden was going to become president. Before that, I was just, you know, spitballing. And I thought to myself, well, to pardon himself, doesn't he have to be convicted first? Because pardoning is like removing a conviction from someone. He's not convicted of it. Even if he admits to it pretty quickly, he's not going to be convicted in time. You know, and if he steps down and Mike Pence does it, which, by the way, is almost certainly what he would want to do, it didn't make sense to me. Of course, you know, more recently I've started to look into it properly and see what the Constitution actually says, the US Constitution. And indeed, it doesn't just quash convictions. You can use it, and indeed it has been used, to prevent you being prosecuted in the first place. So the idea of this presidential pardon could absolutely be used to make Donald Trump effectively immune from prosecution for any of the terrible things he's done. Never mind just related to the Mueller investigation. That's quite clear. In fact, it was used by Gerald Ford regarding Richard Nixon, 1970s. Now, that was where the interesting point came in. So, post-Watergate, Richard Nixon, of course, resigned. Gerald Ford pardoned him so he couldn't be prosecuted. But the question was asked at the time, apparently, could the president pardon himself? Now, unfortunately, this bit I've got from Wikipedia, so I don't know. But the suggestion in Wikipedia was that at the time, an opinion was put forward that the president can't pardon himself. But what I've read more recently from people a bit more in the know is that there's doubt about it. There'll be some people who say he can't, there'll be some people who say he can. In many ways, it doesn't matter, because just like with Nixon, Trump doesn't have to pardon himself. People have already been putting forward the notion that Trump could remove himself temporarily from his presidential duties, you know, have a brain seizure or something. Mike Pence takes over, he pardons Trump, At which point Trump has the option, he's going out anyway, he can just resign at that point, or he can come back and assume his presidential duties because the pardon remains in place, of course. That would seem to be the most straightforward way to do it, because if he pardons himself and people will challenge it, of course, inevitably it goes to the Supreme Court. Now, at this point, you'll be thinking, well, the Supreme Court will say that he can pardon himself. And I will agree, but I will agree for two reasons. Most people will be thinking because it's 6-3 in favour of Republicans. I think that's a pretty important reason. I don't think it's the reason for me why they would do that. And again, I don't know them. I don't know US constitutional details. But the way I would think it through in my own head, the Supreme Court, I don't see as necessarily batting for Trump. Yeah, Republicans, absolutely. But do they really want to put themselves out for Trump? If they really felt that a president shouldn't be able to pardon themselves, would they really, make the opposite judgment, which will stand the test of time? Because presumably precedent will be set at this point. Are they really going to do that if they're actually really secretly against it just for Trump? I don't think so. What I do think is as follows. It's not for protecting Trump, but protecting the Republicans. I think they would do it. If Trump is prosecuted for what effectively amounts to a number of cases of treason, this could have wider implications for the Republican Party, who have, let us be honest, covered for him. They have suppressed this information. They've covered for him. Trump was impeached. They backed him. Granted, he wasn't impeached over this, something just as serious. Some may say more serious. But nonetheless, they've covered for him. If you allow Trump to be prosecuted for his Russian dealings, the Supreme Court may fear a whole can of worms being opened up, which will not do the Republican Party any good at all. So I think they would probably find in favour of it. And the other thing is, do you know what? I'd agree with it. Again, not an expert, but I would agree with it. Because here's the thing, when you look in the Constitution, it talks about the purpose for pardons. And it talks about the pardons being for offences against the United States. So why wouldn't... We're talking about offences against the United States. So why wouldn't Trump be able to pardon himself? Very honestly, if I take myself away from the politics of this, it makes no sense for me for, a presidential pardon not to be able to be used on the president, him or herself. It really doesn't. It makes no sense to me. I do not, and I've tried to find arguments. I've actually tried to find arguments for why the president wouldn't be able to pardon himself. And all I can find are people arguing semantics. I cannot find anyone who has a strong legal or constitutional argument for it. So I think he would be able to pardon himself. But because there is doubt, I think he will be advised to get Pence to do it. Let Pence take over the reins of the presidency for a short while, or even forever. Who cares? Because Biden's coming in anyway. And he doesn't have to do this now. He can wait until the point where he has to concede. And here's another thing, because then I thought to myself, well, aren't you at least admitting guilt? No, not necessarily. He could easily bill it like this. So at the moment, he's claiming that he is the legitimate winner of this election. And he will always do that. Even if he eventually concedes, he doesn't have to say that he was beaten. All he has to say is he carries on saying this election has been stolen. This election has been stolen, and the very establishment I tried to protect America from has retaken control. He can absolutely keep that up, and he can use as his excuse for the self-pardon that he's not guilty, but the establishment have taken over again. They've stolen the election, and there'll be a political witch hunt for him because he is the enemy of the establishment. That's how he billed himself. He was the candidate against the establishment. That's why people voted for him. And he claimed to be the president against the establishment. And people supported him for that as well. And so he can use the same line. Absolute piece of piss. Piece of piss. No problems there either. So I think he will be able to pardon himself. I've not seen any arguments that aren't just silly semantics. I mean, basically the arguments against a president pardoning himself as far as I can tell, come down to, well, that'd be ridiculous, wouldn't it? Would it? Why? Well, I don't know. It just sounds silly. Just sounds silly. Okay, then. So I think he will be able to. Probably safer to get Pence to do it, like I said. The question then is, will he? So, I mean, obviously you'd think he'd want to. Will he actually do it effectively? Now, presumably he's just not going to, he's going to have legal advice on this, because here's where you've got to be careful. Because he's not just overturning a conviction, he's specifically making himself immune to prosecution. So here's the thing, his pardon's got to cover absolutely everything he's done. Because if it doesn't, he could still be prosecuted for something he didn't pardon himself for. He can't just write on his presidential pardon, everything. I'm immune for life for anything. I'm not even taking a speeding ticket. I don't think it works that way. So first of all, is he going to do it in such a way that it covers everything? Second of all, let's say it does. You'd think there'll still be prosecutions against those close to him that weren't any use at the moment when he could just pardon them at any time. As soon as he's no longer in a position to pardon him, the authorities may go, well, we can't get the head guy, so we'll get the ones around him. Jared Kushner and co. That'll be interesting. So is he also going to make sure he pardons all of his co-conspirators? So then let's say he does all that as well. Is it all hopeless? No. The president, and I'm sure people have already said this in the comments at this point, the presidential pardon is for offences against the United States. It covers federal laws only. Donald Trump is facing a few legal difficulties regarding a few financial irregularities in the state of New York. He can do nothing about that. That will be pursued, and if they uncover enough evidence and the prosecution is successful and he is convicted, he can still be convicted of some very serious crimes. It's a little bit like Al Capone, isn't it? You didn't pin on him the really nasty stuff, but you get him anyway. And that may well be what happens to Trump. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.